the Russian invasion of Ukraine reaching its fifth day on Monday, the International Olympic Committee has asked the international sports federations and event organizers to not invite or allow the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes or officials in international competitions. To understand the significance of the decision, I have with me Jules Boykoff. Jules is a professor and department chair in the Department of Politics and Government at the Pacific University in Oregon. He's also the author of 4 books on the Olympics and 2 more on suppression of political dissent. Jules, welcome to News 9. Thank you so much for taking the time out and doing this.
My
Uh,
pleasure. Great to join you.
Thank you. First of all, I was just trying to understand what your reaction was when you heard that IOC had taken this decision, because a lot of people are saying that this is an unprecedented decision, but we are also hearing from the other side that the IOC could have done a lot more. So, what was your reaction to this decision?
Well, for starters, it's interesting because the International Olympic Committee is wading into political matters here. And this after for decades upon decades saying that they are not at all involved in politics. People like me who've been studying the Olympics have long said that that is a myth, that the Olympics are in fact apolitical, and today really kind of proved that. So this whole incident should be the death knell of that myth that the Olympics are apolitical. But the other thing about this is that Russia has long violated the Olympic truce, and the International Olympic Committee pointed to the violation of the Olympic truce as one of the main reasons it is issuing these sanctions against Russia. And yet, back in 2008, Russia invaded South Ossetia right as the Olympics started in Beijing. In 2014, Russia invaded Crimea between the Olympics and Paralympics that it was hosting in Sochi. And so this is the third time, maybe that's it, 3 strikes, you're out kind of situation. But for a lot of people, this has been a long time coming, especially when you lacquer on top of what I just mentioned, breaking the Olympic truce, with the long ongoing doping situation that Russia has been grappling with.
Right. Would you say that athletes kind of also forced the IOC and FIFA's hands, because we are hearing a lot of these protests, individual protests happening from everywhere, from fencing to a bunch of other sports. So do you think that also played a role, because the IOC was basically cornered into making this move?
Absolutely. The rise of athletes speaking out about the situation in Ukraine and the Russian invasion of Ukraine was a major factor in all this. Groups like Global Athlete here in North America, World Players Association over in Europe, and numerous individual athletes from around the world have signed on to a letter excoriating Russia for what happened and imploring the International Olympic Committee to get to work getting Russia out of the movement while this is all happening. And so, yes, absolutely, athletes are playing a key role here. After all, if you think about the fact that FIFA just excluded Russia from the World Cup just moments ago, it was because of these federations in places like Sweden, Poland, the Czech Republic that said they weren't going to play Russia, not even in neutral territory. Your viewers will know about the fact that in previous Olympics, the International Olympic Committee has allowed Russia to participate so long as they're not participating under their flag and under the name Russia. Instead, they participate under the Russian Olympic Committee, for example. Everybody knows this is a farce, and we've been living with this farce for a long time, and look at what the outcome is. So thank goodness for these athletes speaking out about what they care about, the integrity of the Olympics and the Olympic movement, and yes, that played a huge role here.
Right. I've noticed that the IOC has also withdrawn the Olympic order that it had bestowed upon Vladimir Putin. Do you just see that as an empty gesture, or do you see that as having some sort of a meaning?
Well, on one hand, the International Olympic Committee is well known for handing out awards to its buddies and its cronies. I mean, they are professionals at self-congratulatory backslappery, and giving Vladimir Putin this Olympic order back in 2001 is a good example of that. Under normal circumstances, I would say this is pretty trivial, but actually we know that sports matter very much to Vladimir Putin, and these sort of honors probably do as well. And so that might put a little bit of a thought in the mind of Vladimir Putin, but hey, he's got a million other more important things flowing through his brain right now, but it's certainly symbolic. Maybe though, now that they've opened up that, possibility of taking away these Olympic orders, they might revisit some of the other people on the list, because there are a number of other folks on there that have dubious pasts as well.
Right. You mentioned that the IOC has basically set a precedent by wading into political territory with this. How do you see this, playing out for the IOC? Do you think that it has basically made matters difficult for itself? Because as we know that the IOC likes to be politically correct as much as possible.
It'll be interesting to see. That's one of the things, Amit, that I'm keeping my eye on moving forward, is whether this does cause trouble, whether it kind of opens the Pandora's box, if you will, of politics on the International Olympic Committee. But like I said, Thomas Bach, who's the current president of the International Olympic Committee, has long been intertwined in political matters. I mean, when he won the office back in 2013, the first call that came into him was from Vladimir Putin, who was hosting the Olympics the very next year. Putin used the 2014 Sochi Olympics as a political trampoline for his career, and as I mentioned, the invasion of Crimea. So, there's been a lot of questions asked of Thomas Bach under his control of the International Olympic Committee. In fact, the International Olympic Committee has become a lot more authoritarian itself. And Thomas Bach, it basically now runs the organization with an iron fist. And so we'll have to see what happens here. I think there's more and more scales falling from more and more people's eyes around the world when it comes to the realities of the Olympics. And the pressure is really building on a serious and significant set of reforms that need to happen in order for the Olympics to try to regain its integrity.
When you speak about these significant reforms, what exactly, can you just elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, I think for starters, the fact that, we talked during the Beijing Olympics about how Beijing, who has a history of serious human rights abuses, was nevertheless handed the Olympic Games, even though what they were doing in China violated the spirit of the Olympic Charter in very direct ways. But there's other things as well. Because of the fact that we were talking about human rights in Beijing, and then after that, doping, we weren't talking about a lot of the other ingrained features of the Olympics, which have caused problems for the IOC over time. I'm talking about chronic overspending. The Olympics almost always go over budget. One study from Oxford University said every single Olympics from 1960 has gone over budget. So that's a problem. Militarization of the Olympic City is a serious problem. A lot of countries use the opportunity to crank up their quotient of serious weapons that are militarized, and they then don't go away after the Olympics. And a lot of people are concerned about that. There's also the fact that they engage in greenwashing, talking a big environmental game, but not really following through. And there's also the gentrification and eviction of working people in each and every Olympic city. And finally, there's a lot of question about whether the Olympics are in fact undermining democracy in a lot of places. The IOC likes to say how hosting the Olympics will be a really big deal for the city, and I think that's actually true. It is a big deal, and yet somehow it's not big enough to have everyday working people in each Olympic city get a chance to weigh in. And so that's one of the major reforms that a lot of people who are watching the Olympics would like to see happen. Have everyday people in prospective Olympic cities get to vote on whether they want to host the games and use public money for them. That simply has not happened, and the International Olympic Committee has shown no interest whatsoever in doing so. But perhaps because of all this pressure around what's going on with Russia, Ukraine, and then the most two recent Olympics, which were extremely controversial, this could change. And we might see the International Olympic Committee finally start to bend to some of these totally reasonable demands for reform of its games.
Right. Thank you so much for taking the time out and actually talking to us about this. That was a great conversation, Jules.
My pleasure. Thanks for reaching out.
Thank you so much.